confusion, control of my mind. I've chosen to submit and bow my knee to lies from the mouth of my enemy.
This may be one of the worst cases of child abuse I have ever heard, in which the victim lives and is able to tell their story. So before we begin, viewer discretion is definitely advised. In most child cases this severe, the child dies, and we don't get the victim's complete story, and only get part of the story from the monster parents who perform the vile acts on the child. In this case, the survivor not only survives to tell his story and face his abusers, but becomes a hero. This is a case that involves SA and PA, so like I said, viewer discretion is definitely advised. Before we begin, hello, my name is Holly. Welcome to the Murder She Shed, the place you can hear rarely told true crime cases right from my she shed. If you would like to join us here weekly, make sure you just push that subscribe button and I'll be here for you. Our story begins in Apple Valley, California. Apple Valley is located at the southern edge of the Mojave Desert. Richard J. Swank was a substitute teacher for the Adelanto School District, as well as a district psychologist for Keppel Union Elementary School District in Pearl Blossom. He is also an author of 3 different books. One is called Simon's Shadows, which is still sold on Amazon to this day. One of the reviews of his book describes Richard as being a voice to all the kids that were left to fend for themselves, which is rather ironic considering what he's done to his children. Richard Swank put up a good front, but behind closed doors, he was a monster to his 16 children. Yes, 16. All of the Swank children survived a brutal childhood, but the horrendous torture one child suffered and lived through is a miracle. Michael Swank was born premature in 1985 to Richard and Monita Swank. He weighed only 4 pounds and was hospitalized for 8 weeks before he was brought home to his family's home in Apple Valley. From the start, Richard hated Michael and would say that Michael had been switched at birth. Richard called him an abomination. Richard told Monita that she was not to interact with Michael, and so she would only pay attention to Michael when Richard wasn't around. In a family with 16 children, none of the other children were allowed to play or interact with Michael upon pain of punishment. For a number of years, Richard would force Michael to put on a dress, and he would make everyone call Michael Michelle. Michael was not permitted to watch television, go to the movies, or play outside like a normal child. He was never permitted in family photographs. His image was even removed in one picture in which he actually appeared in it. Michael's birthday was never celebrated. At Christmas, everyone except Michael received gifts. Richard forbade Michael from eating with the family, and then he only received the scraps that were left over. He was not given utensils and was made to eat with his hands. Michael would often resort to eating dog food, digging in the trash for food, and once even drinking his own urine because he is so dehydrated. Michael even once went 4 days without eating absolutely anything. He was starving. Sometime around 1992, Michael and all his siblings were pulled out of school because of the school making repeated calls to CPS. The school officials would notice bruises on the children and find them digging through trash for something to eat. At just 10 years old, Melissa, one of Michael's siblings, was put in charge of caring for all her younger siblings, feeding them thin pancakes, instant noodles, and spaghetti, and very little of that. Melissa only knew basic addition and subtraction. I guess she's supposedly supposed to be homeschooling her siblings, but she was never given books or worksheets to even do that. The poor child hardly knew anything. She hadn't attended much school, and yet she was expected to take care of all these other siblings. At times, all of the children were not allowed to eat. While the parents ate steak and lobster, the children were not allowed to eat. After her parents finished meals like these, the children stood around gnawing on bones and corn cobs. Melissa once had finally saved enough money to buy a guinea pig, to later find the animal dead with its head bashed in. She knew Richard had killed the little guinea pig. Melissa had also once wrote a journal in which she had wrote, "No child deserved to be treated the way her brother Michael was being treated." Richard actually found this journal, and Melissa was beaten with a belt and thrown into a shower stall naked with her brother Michael. She was told that if she cared so much for him, she should be his lover. Her father called her Michael's F-buddy. For a week, the two were forced to stand in a corner together and hold hands. She was also forced to eat scraps with Michael for that entire week. Unfortunately for Michael, this was his life because every day, not just a few days, but every day of his entire life until he turned 18, he was forced to stand in a corner. The children were constantly threatened with placement in foster care, which Richard alleged would be worse than their current situation. If they revealed any of the family secrets to outsiders, they would get put in this foster care. And apparently, they didn't know that foster care would most likely have been better than the hell they were being put through. Richard would also coach and drill the children on how to respond to inquiries from the outsiders. The children complied with Richard's orders because they just were so scared of him. The children were led to believe that every family was like theirs. Even after being taken out of school, CPS was called multiple times about the abuse in the home. The children were too afraid to disclose what was happening in their home. After one CPS visit, Richard held a knife to Michael's throat and threatened to kill him if he ever informed CPS about the abuse. The first time Michael's mother, Monita, witnessed the abuse, Michael was only 4 years old. She said Richard walked into the room and just punched the little boy in the stomach, and he flew about 6 feet across the room. She said Richard walked over to where Michael landed, picked him up, and continued to slug him until he lay bleeding and unconscious on the floor. She took her son to the bathtub and started to call 911. But before she called, Richard said he would tell them that she did it and forced the other kids to say Mom did it. So she chose to ignore the abuse from then on out. Sadly, she was just a coward and wasn't a good enough mother, and I guess she cared more about her welfare than protecting her children. And that is just sad. I don't never understand that. As a mother, I would do whatever I could to protect mine. But I guess we're all a little different. By the age of 5, the abuse had escalated to the point that Michael was no longer allowed to even sleep in a bed. Michael was forced to sleep handcuffed in the shower or bathtub. Michael was later forced to sleep in a locked, enclosed storage area under a coffee table. At one point, he was left in the coffee table for 2 or 3 days until he ended up soiling himself, and Richard could no longer stand the smell, so he just let him out at that point. The other children were informed that Michael would and molest everyone at night unless he was locked up. The children were so scared that they were even too scared to try to even help Michael. Some point after this, Michael was allowed to sleep on the garage floor, handcuffed to the frame of a bed. Although Michael's mother and father both beat him, Richard seemed to sadistically enjoy the beatings. Michael was often handcuffed during the beatings, where he couldn't even protect himself. Richard would beat him with fists, belts, a souvenir baseball bat, a dowel, a maglite flashlight, a rubber mallet, books, and handcuffs. Richard principally beat Michael on the head so that any marks would not be visible through his hair. Nevertheless, Michael had visible injuries all of the time. Richard beat him to unconsciousness on more than one occasion. The other children were also beaten, but not to the degree and frequency with which Michael was beaten. Richard often used his children as target practice with the BB gun as they ran around the backyard. I'm going to give you an additional warning because if you think all of what we already discussed was bad, then you will find the next stuff extremely disturbing. So again, viewer discretion is advised. On another occasion, Richard engaged in a lengthy beating of Michael, during which he punched Michael until he fell to the ground, stepped on his crotch, continued beating him while he was down, picked him up by the throat, and then pinned him up against the wall. Richard informed Michael that he was not worthy to bleed on his carpet. Richard even once hit Michael in the privates repeatedly with a heavy-duty screwdriver. It was so painful that Michael could not walk for 2 days afterwards. On yet another occasion, Richard would attach vice grips to his private area to coerce confessions. Michael's older brother said that after Richard applied the vice grips to Michael's privates on one occasion, Michael fell to the ground in complete agony and was screaming. The other children could hear Michael crying for long periods of times during these interrogations. They would just hide in a closet and sing songs in an effort to cover up the sounds of Michael's screams. The children would often hear their father say that Michael would say anything with vice grips on his. Richard would at times make Michael engage in boxing matches with him. During one of these matches, Richard broke Michael's nose. From that time on, he was unable to breathe through his right nostril. Michael received no medical attention, of course. Richard would poke Michael's foot with a knife, choke him to the point of passing out, and one time he even grabbed Michael by his privates, lifting him in the air, which moved him 10 feet from his current location. Richard told Michael's older sister, Melissa, that Michael had molested their youngest sibling. Richard then gave Melissa, informed her that he was taking the other children and leaving the house. He told her to make sure Michael never would molest this child again. Melissa believed her father wanted her to kill Michael, but instead she threatened Michael that if he ever touched the baby again, she would kill him. Michael denied ever touching the baby. She believed him because he never had even any access to any of the children. He was always tied up and handcuffed. He was never allowed to even talk to the other children. When Richard returned back home, he appeared angry when he discovered that she had not killed Michael. On or around Michael's 10th birthday, Richard brought Michael into a bedroom. This is a rough part. All of it's rough, but it's getting worse. As he gets older, it only escalated. Let me tell you, this one's hard. On around Michael's 10th birthday, Richard brought Michael into a bedroom, closed and locked the door, dropped his pants, and ordered Michael to give him OS. Michael did so out of fear. After about 5 minutes, Richard turned Michael around, strained his arms above his head, and essayed Michael for 5 to 10 minutes. For the next 8 years, Michael was essayed at least 2 times a week. In order to get Monita out of the way so Richard could essay Michael, he would give her a long list of errands to run, which would involve visits to multiple stores. Richard would post the other children at the window to serve as lookouts to notify him when their mother returned. Richard would then take Michael in his room and close the door. Richard asked Michael's older sister to obtain a plunger, zucchini, cucumber, or other random objects from the refrigerator on some of these occasions. Richard inserted a zucchini into Michael on one occasion and a toilet plunger on another. On at least one occasion, Michael exited the bedroom with his pants bloodied and stuck to his bottom. Richard just told Michael, "If you're still bleeding in 15 minutes, get over it." Michael's younger brother helped staunch the bleeding using a sanitary napkin. Michael's younger sister once accidentally walked into the garage while the essay was occurring. Michael was rewarded with food after these incidents and beat if he refused. Richard even once told Monita that he was essaying Michael, but indicated he was just joking after she became upset. By some miracle, Michael was able to survive all this abuse, and after he turned 18, was able to join the army and get away from his abusive home. Just a few months after Michael left home, his father divorced his mother and ran off with a much younger woman. Michael spent 15 months of his time in the military in Iraq. He has since received many medals and ribbons for his service and plans on staying in the military for many years to come. Michael is married and has 2 stepchildren and is said to be an excellent father, although he had no example of what a real father should be like. They later had a child of their own. While isolated in his family's garage, he taught himself to read and write. He greatly values the education he has been able to gather during his service and is continuing towards his bachelor's degree in criminal justice. Michael has been in therapy off and on The military sent him for therapy after being made aware of the court case against his father. Michael shares his stance on where he found the strength by saying, "You can't give up. It would be a lot easier to give up and give in. You have to take control of your life. You have to make the choice to rise above. You have two choices, play the pity card and live your life in a downward spiral until you yourself become a perpetrator, or you can realize you have been through some pretty heinous stuff, then realize that this is not the end." In 2005, Michael's brother Joshua died of an accidental overdose. Richard actually collected $500,000 on Joshua's Army life insurance policy and bought himself a sports car. And this disgusted his children. I suppose most of them already had left home at that point, and they were disgusted that he got the money. After he abused his kids like that, he took his child's money and bought a sports car. Disgusting man. Michael decided to come forward about the abuse in 2008. He thought, "My father no longer needs to get away with what he's done." And he even testified against his father. He's quite a hero in my book. Not only to testify in front of his father, but to become a military hero and further his education and make something out of himself. And to be such a great father, he's just an example of what even normal people should be. And he came out of this in one of the worst abusive cases I've ever seen and became a very special man. In 2009, Richard was convicted of 11 counts of SA and 1 count PA, including torture. Richard, of course, denied any abuse had occurred. During the trial, Richard wore an eye patch, braces, or uses a wheelchair to garner pity, even though he did not need the use of any of these devices. His children testified that he would sometimes do this when they lived with him, but it was all fake because he did not need to use a wheelchair or an eye patch. Older sister Melissa is a lawyer who has 6 bio children and is a foster parent to 6 additional children. She also published her first children's book in 2009 called The Big Fib. Sadly, 2 of Michael's brothers turned out to be more like their dad and now are in prison for murder. The brothers murdered Army Specialist Daniel Yarbrough. Daniel was a soldier at Fort Irwin and battle buddies and friends of Wesley Swank, Michael's brother. 2014, Logan and his brother Wesley Swank were having financial troubles. Wesley Swank, who was said to be the mastermind behind the murder plot, created fake email accounts and forged signatures to make himself beneficiary of Daniel's policy. Then on September 14, 2014, Wesley then invited Daniel to his brother-in-law Thomas Bradshaw's apartment in Apple Valley. And as Daniel sat in his vehicle in front of the apartment, he was shot and killed by Logan Swank. After the shooting, Wesley even had the nerves to attend Daniel's funeral service, introducing himself to friends and family as his best friend. May you rest in peace, Daniel. Sad that you had to be a victim of these men that turned out just like their father, just as evil as their father. Alright guys, this was an upsetting one. Although it ended well for Michael, there are many children being abused today that will not have the ending Michael had, unfortunately. This is definitely a story to get people to realize the abuse that goes on in homes. Possibly homes of people we encounter every day. Please, if you suspect abuse, report it. It may be the only escape some of these children get. We have to be their voice. We have to be their voice because sometimes they can't speak up themselves. They're too afraid. It just blows my mind that there are homes like this. And I think that's why sometimes we don't speak up, because we don't realize the things, the horrible, awful things that can go on in some homes because we're so naive. But I hope that through listening to these kind of stories, we can learn the depths of evil in some children's homes. And we just will speak up and help those children speak up, be their voice. I love you guys, and don't forget about my other channel called Strange She Shit if you'd like to come join me there. Get up here and lay down then. Sound like you broke something. Why does my bed feel like it's sagging since you jumped up here? I think you broke a leg off. I think Max just broke a leg off my bed. It's going downhill. I'm scared to look. And I thought I weighed a lot. Good grief, Max. You know, I'm going crooked, so if I lean this way, it's not my fault. I don't know what else could go wrong. I just got my house fixed. And now this bed in the she shed's broken. Also, the other day, I broke the glass out of my she shed door. Live. You went up there? I think the bed's broke. Your pulley fell off the end. You went up there? Now lay down, Bubba. During one of these matches, Richard broke... There's a bee. He hates bees. Simon hates bees with a passion. Sorry, we're having a bee-sidient. A bee-sidient, aren't we? We're having a bee-sidient. You're alright. You're going to live. He's not going to hurt you if you leave him alone. He'll leave you alone, okay? Just leave him alone. Alright, go lay down. Both of y'all, I'm not done yet. You already broke my bed. You going to try the rest of it?
I've given fear a place in my life. I've given confusion control of my mind. I've chosen to submit and bow my knee to lies from the mouth of my enemy. Oh, I can feel my mind losing control.